Welcome to episode 1 of the Positivism podcast. Today I'm interviewing Emily Elizabeth Duong. She's an ex-pro skater, a podcaster, a serial entrepreneur, and also a close friend of mine. Her podcast, What Fulfills You, covers topics such as spirituality, mindfulness, personal development, stoicism, and much more. This is part 1 of a 2-part podcast. Here, I ask Emily personal questions about greatness, family, relationships, and love. Part 2 is potentially coming out, but that is unclear because the kind of topics that we speak within the continuation of the conversation are really personal, and therefore I need her approval in order to publish it. If you're wondering why I look sunburnt, that is because I'm currently on a trip to Southeast Asia, and Thailand has not been kind to my skin, possibly also my choices. The podcast is not perfect. When I recorded it, I had a cold and my nose was stuffed, and therefore you might hear some light breathing throughout specific parts of the podcast. I apologize it, and I will do my best to make sure that that never happens again. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. I thank you for your time, and without any further ado, let's jump straight into my conversation with Emily Elizabeth Duong. All right, welcome to the Positivism podcast, Mrs. Emily. It's actually the first time I'm calling you Mrs. Emily. That's fascinating.
I know. Ciao, ciao, buongiorno, or
how do you feel about that?
Buonasera. I feel fine. I prefer mademoiselle, but you know, I just get fancy.
I feel like I have a problem with French people.
Honestly, same. I prefer Italians more for my dating experience, but yeah, enough said. Italians over French.
Yes, I mean that's like any day, you know.
Yeah.
We talk a lot, Emily. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Like I don't talk with a lot of people, but I do talk quite a bit with you.
Yeah.
You are very, 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 very fascinating as a person because you're like so cute with it. You're like, oh, thank you. but also there's like a completely different side of you that's like not that.
I know.
One of the things that I find most interesting and really one of the questions that I ask myself when it comes to this conversation was like, how there's so many different things, interesting things about Emily, but this is possibly one of the ones that I find is more interesting to showcase, and that is you are really fucking competitive, mm-hmm. and that's like the dominant side to you. At the same time, you also have this ability to be introspective and examine a lot the kind of things that drive you, mm-hmm. which to me is like a unicorn. I don't meet a lot of people like that. Can you just give us like a quick rundown, a summary of your life, and specifically hinting at these qualities?
The competitiveness and the introspectiveness.
Yes.
Yeah, I think my background will say it all with where my competitiveness comes from, but I grew up in a very small town of 8,000 people. I actually went to Taylor Swift's rival high school. That's the only relevant thing about where I grew up. But growing up, I started figure skating at the age of 5 or 6 years old. Went to a birthday party. I wouldn't get off the ice, and I think my mom was like, all right, let's keep her company, keep her busy, and put her on the ice and see if she wants to stay, like for lessons. So I think that's how it started. I started competing in this sport around 6 or 7. I remember I was really nervous. My first program ever was to the song Godfather, like the main theme song. I competed in this sport for about like 12 or 13 years. I stopped competing at 18 because I had an injury, ended up going to college, so the timing was coincidental. And then during that time though, not just figure skating, I had a 2-year break from skating around the age of 10, and I picked up tennis at the time, competitive tennis, which helped that my older brother, who's about 7.5 years older, he was a competitive tennis player. He was state champion in the state of Pennsylvania. And so he trained me, and long story short, I was competing in 2 individual sports simultaneously. I also was a natural competitor and also naturally talented at both sports that enabled me to more or less win majority of the time. And so that's where my competitive background, I would argue, comes from. But I think also my self-discipline to this day. I tell you often, I was trained in the skating sport. I was trained by Russians. And if anyone understands the nature of Russian people, they are disciplined. They don't take bullshit. And I was basically, I joke about this, half raised by a Russian mother from like 8 to, I don't know, 14 or 15. Her name was Ina, blonde and snappy. And let me tell you, the male Russian coaches are less feisty. But yeah, that's my main background. And then, when I was 18, I went to college, small school in Southern California. Went from Pennsylvania to California, so 3,000 miles away, left my hometown, left a small town. I was ready for California for years. I was ready probably since I was like 14. And then over that time, I, started to develop what I wanted to do more so after college, the early 20s life. I was in a relationship for all of college, which 100% contributes or was the beginning of my journey on introspection. So that comes into play. And now that I'm 25, so that was 7 years ago from 18 to now. So yeah, pretty much that was my journey. And then I would say a lot of my young adult years in adulting life was from living in California by myself, which was such a gift. Being away from parents, not having to rely on them emotionally, financially, especially after school, things like that just made me grow up faster. So I think that plays a lot into the story of my already unique athletic background, being a competitive athlete in true sports, being pretty good at both, and then jumping over to California and growing up by myself. So
there is so much to unpack there. I love it. Damn. So you're taking on ice skating and tennis. Mm-hmm. You are destroying everyone in both. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what you do. You go to college, get into this relationship, and that's the beginning of your introspection journey. Mm-hmm. Let's start from the competitive side of things, because I am curious regarding that. When I grew up, I wasn't good in sports. I sucked at pretty much everything. I wonder, what made you great so early?
I think the first thing is that I had the baseline of natural talent, but I wasn't like Michael Phelps, for example, was built for swimming, right? It's not like I was that where I'm built for skating or built for tennis, but I had baseline talent. I picked it up. But I think a few other factors came into play. I think as I think about it, I think just, maybe the nature of my parents for sure. They pushed me enough to be like, you don't have to settle for anything less than your ability to perform well. And I think because I also grew up, maybe my first few competitions, I actually did get first. And I think that kind of set the baseline of all right, she can win. So we're going to kind of keep that as the standard of, not that it was bad luckily I didn't grow up in a household where it was shitty if I lost or anything or got second or third, but it was we knew Emily can perform. So we just got to add a little bit of pressure on her in a healthy, just right way. So I think that's from parents. And then having an older brother who's about 8 years older than me, it's not soft inside the household. He was a brother. So he's, giving me shit. If I was ever upset about something, I remember he made this comment when I was a teenager. He's like, you let it get to your head too easy. And that stuck with me because that's probably why I have been really great at not letting a lot of things get to my head when it comes to outside noise and trying to distract me from my own path. That was a factor. So having an older brother who was maybe saying, don't be a bitch about it, you could, especially in tennis, we would play in humid weather. Unlike California, it was humid and sweaty in Pennsylvania over the summer, long hours, maybe no water breaks sometimes. And then on top of that with my Russian coaches. So I think it was that combination on top of everything else.
Nature plus nurture, environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. You're very direct as a person, I would like to say. That's just my assessment. You do make me think of someone that picks up things really fast and that is overall really good at a lot of things. Yeah, I really, in some way, I'm jealous about it. because
Yeah.
I feel like I've never been there, and to me it was necessary to learn a method and a structure and like habits and stuff like that in order to actually get good at things. Whilst it seems like you had this like internal confidence and ability to perform under pressure. That's really cool.
I think that comes with the sport of skating, though, especially, and tennis, actually, right? Like, if you think about how the structure of that sport is, you go out on the ice by yourself. And I started doing that at the age of 6 or 7. People have stage fright, people have fear of public speaking. This is like a whole nother ball game, right? You can like piss yourself before going out on the ice where you're dressed up already. You have some makeup on, hairspray in, and they announce your name and you skate out all by yourself and everyone's watching you. I think that once again highlights that experience of kind of like, I did that, so not much can scare me. And I think, not to jump ahead, but similar to how today, having worked in sales, as you recall, and making cold calls and cold pitches to people and being told, fuck off many times, not much can scare me after you experience something like that. So to me, it's kind of like the same thing when you force yourself to do a cold shower or a cold plunge and you do it first thing in the morning. Nothing after that is that bad or that scary per se. So when you do that repetitively, then everything else is a lot easier. You become more self-confident by nature. But I didn't really have a choice. Like in skating, it's like you go out there, everyone else is doing it, so you have to as well. And the same with tennis. It could be a close match. I remember one of my last competitive matches was when I was like down literally like 4-0, 0-4. The other girl was like close to winning the second set, and I somehow came back and won 7-6. And it's like being under that kind of pressure teaches you in life, which is part of my personality today, that you can do it. It's just a matter of what you tell yourself.
Do you feel like you always had that kind of you can do it attitude?
Yes, especially more so in the past 5-6 years, because I didn't have, as I look at this I've observed this a lot of my girlfriends who grew up here in the US, they grew up with the comfort of emotional support from family that I didn't have as much in my, like after college, basically college and onwards. And so I think when you are more or less against the wall where you have nothing to rely on, you have to decide if you will bet on yourself or not. And I think that when I observe maybe why there were different outcomes between some of my peers and I attribute it a lot to that. And there's pros and cons. Obviously, I sometimes go, wow, like that's so cute that you can talk to your mom about that and she doesn't judge you or make immediate criticism. And rather, your mom is like, also comforting and also very much on your side about it. Although, to be fair, one needs a little bit of both, right? But I think nonetheless, like I didn't have either option. So I think I really had to approach things in my young adult life from a more self-reliant position. And with that mentality comes, I can do it. Whereas some people, including one of my really close male friends who unfortunately he moved across the country and then now had to move back to his home place in Malibu. But similar to that is that comfort of, okay, you have a backup. I didn't really have a backup, more from the emotional support side, where I think a lot of people from my social circle do have.
We talked quite a bit about your family situation in the past. For anyone that doesn't know, I think we mentioned this already, but like we're really close friends and we speak often about like really, really personal topics. Could you run me through your family situation a little bit? And, you spoke already a little bit about it, but could you go deeper with it? And for whatever you feel comfortable sharing, obviously.
I've always been adamant about sharing this openly because I have seen it as a common pattern amongst especially Asian American children who are children of immigrant parents. And I think this is also common amongst children of immigrant parents in general in America, but especially with Asian Americans. And so that's why I don't necessarily hesitate about talking about it. With that being said, my parents, they immigrated to America in their late teens, early 20s from Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And so I respect them and appreciate their ability to overcome a lot of obstacles as immigrants and paving their own path here in America. But with that background comes different levels of trauma and different levels of understanding or lack thereof in raising children in a completely different country and different culture, which for me, you could really see heavily once I was like in my late teens, because, and like I said, I think I would argue that a lot of Asian American children actually feel this way. You can even read it on Reddit threads, which I have, and there's so many common themes, which is gnarly, that had made me feel more confident to speak about it. I was lucky in that I didn't have parents that were like, you need to be a doctor, lawyer, do any of this. They were very just like, be happy and be as successful as you can so that all the college funds that we save for you is worthwhile type of thing. And, all their sacrifices, that's the classic immigrant background story. But especially my mom, though, she really had trouble with envisioning a female like myself, especially from an Asian culture background. In most cases, Asian women are ideally meant to be more soft-spoken, more listening versus speaking up, more maybe listen to what you're told to do type of thing, which is an interesting perspective because she was also a small business owner herself. She wanted to raise me and my brother, but also have something going for herself. So she took her own initiative, yet didn't really want me to take my own initiative. It was a struggle once I left my corporate job. She didn't agree with it at all because she wanted someone else to be my boss. So it wasn't that she didn't want me to be an entrepreneur eventually. I think she actually wanted that. But for no legitimate reason, she wanted me to be a few more years in corporate just cause. There wasn't like, well, because you can make more money. It wasn't even that. There was no rationale around it. She just wanted it to be like a, because I said so, which is also a common theme growing up. If I were to ask questions like, oh, why should I do that? Or why can't I do that? It would always be because I said so. And, I think the biggest theme with my upbringing, again, primarily on the mother side, just because as some people could maybe sense in the way I speak and in the way I present myself, it is not a common stereotype as an Asian woman. And so my mom struggled a lot with understanding how to give me the autonomy of my life as I became an adult, because she always felt like she needed to tell me what to do. That included my decision to move from Orange County to Los Angeles. She was very against it. In fact, nearly tried to bribe me to not move to Los Angeles, which is odd. And it came out of this fear of what I think is maybe fear of control, lack of control, and also just complete misunderstanding of allowing children to progress and flourish as adults. I think she was still holding on to this idea like they're still my children and therefore I will treat them like my children, versus that transition from, okay, child to adult. So that was my main obstacle, and therefore, because there was such a strong pattern of disagreement and conflict, I was not able to really share not only who I am as a person with my mom, but yeah, I was gonna say parents, but just more so my mom. But also, I don't share with her my decisions. I don't share with her my romantic relationship, my friendships, things like that, because there was always conflict around it. That she's someone that I unfortunately don't necessarily trust in that sphere, but in a respectful way. It's just in layman's terms, we call it boundaries.
Cha-ching.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you say that? Chapeau? I don't know. That's nice. I was watching Jordan Peterson yesterday, and he went over this concept I've heard many times from him of the devouring mother. The devouring mother archetype is basically, from my understanding, which is very limited on the subject, it's a mother that pushes her needs and pushes her desires and wants onto their children, and doesn't allow them to grow as their own people, as in they need to fit within this specific vision of what they envision for them.
Yeah.
I think within the example that Jordan Peterson made that was related to Greta Thunberg, as in it was hypothesizing that the mom of Greta Thunberg is the typical archetype of the devouring mother. That's interesting. Does any of this resonate with you, or do you feel like that's not the case?
It does actually. And I will add one layer to it, which is that I believe part of why my mom has this vision for where I'm supposed to fit in life is because, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but she is one of those people that heavily believes in what I would call, in America's version of astrology and birth charts and all these different things. And now you probably are not surrounded by a lot of people that, are heavily into it and will use statements like, yeah, I can't date him because he's a Libra. Believe it or not, Elia, I hear it all the fucking time. And you can imagine how I have to hold back from debating people and having conversations because it's just like a dead end. My mom is one of them, although she doesn't use it in like the, I call it the American astrology with all these like Pisces, all this different things. She takes it a step further, and some people do this too, actually. I have maybe I think 2 or 3 friends that have also done this. They go to like an astrologist, fortune teller is how I call it. And based on your birth chart, the time you were born, where the moons and the stars were, there's a whole vision of what your life path will look like. Okay. And there are some people that will literally not date someone because the description of what this astrologist said, like, oh, your next partner is going to be XYZ. And maybe I have a friend that's like, oh, this guy I'm really interested in, he's really interested in me, but he doesn't fit this description of what this astrologist said, so I'm just gonna not go for this. That's a very similar framework as my mom, where she has this whole tape in Vietnamese from this guy that I just always called fortune teller, and she's listened to this since I was a fucking kid. She would listen to it on the drive to skating, all these different things. And so I think that plays a huge role in her crazy fears and also the way she sees my life is supposed to be, because this guy made up some whole thing about how my life is supposed to be. Now, to be open-minded, I think it's okay if one uses it as, 30% as a guideline. Maybe everyone needs something to like latch onto, in my opinion, right? Some people it's religion, some people it's maybe astrology, right? Philosophy, whatever. For her and for some people I know, it's astrology and maybe even a step further, birth charts and all this different stuff. I like to use Myers-Briggs, personalities, maybe frameworks, but that's just me. And so, yes, there's this motherfucking guy that has a whole thing about me, and let's say he says Emily's supposed to end up with someone of this race. That might make her have a lot of conflict with me if I'm with someone of a different ethnic background. Does that kind of make sense? So, same thing. If he says, Emily should not be near the water in 2018 because she could die. Well, too late, motherfuckers, because I'm in California near the water, and no, I did not die. It's 2023 now. So, point of my belief is, look, I'll be fair. You can use it as a guideline, but two differences. Number one is I live out my life. So one could have the anxiety for me, one could have the worry for me, but if I don't absorb that energy, that does not translate into my own reality. That's my first belief. My second one is free will. Now, they believe in free will as well from my discussions with some people who heavily believe in it, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like they believe 70% of this astrologist type of thing or person telling them their potential vision and path of life, and 30% free will. And I'm saying I, if anything, would swap that if I were to believe in astrology type of thing. But yeah, that's part of why she thinks, Emily's not supposed to be in this career path because astrologist guy said she's supposed to be a novel writer. Apparently I'm supposed to be a fiction writer. But, I think that also has to start with some sort of natural talent, natural interest. And so I try to comfort my mother by saying, well, I'm kind of close. Like at one point she said I was supposed to be a journalist, right? So I'm like, well, look, I'm in podcasting. Like I try to connect the dots for her for confirmation bias, and she'll be like, oh my God, see, he was right. I'm like, yeah. Podcaster, journalist, yep, confirmation bias, there it is. You got what you wanted? Happy now? Like, we made him right, But look, my framework is a little different. It's a combination of spirituality, actual science, actual human behavior, and you and I know that, so. That's what makes it hard.
You're contributing into propelling that vicious cycle of confirmation bias. That's fascinating. It seems like you went through, it seems like you went through a transformation in the last certain amount of years. when it comes to being more introspective and being more mindful. And you mentioned in the intro that it started with a relationship in college. Could you run me through that experience and then tie that what you learned about your mother because of your development?
Yeah, this is actually great because it ties in how I've been able to balance my good competitive nature and why the introspection was needed to kind of put into check. Basically, from 18 to about 20 years old, I was dating someone, and he was about 2 years older than me. And the relationship came to, it was a breakup, but we got back together. But in the leading up to the breakup, there were significant patterns of unhealthy partner behavior from my side. There genuinely, I can't really think anything was on his side, to be really candid. I can't think of anything. It was just came a lot out of insecurity from me, came out of some insecurity combined with competitiveness. So maybe if it's about another female, whether it was before me or just stupid, really trivial stuff, I would get jealous, slightly competitive, and then maybe make a story out of it. It's pretty crazy. I would go as far as I remember, it makes me cringe. I think about a time where I don't know what I was trying to do, but I think I was trying to probably manipulate him to some degree by pretending I was with one of my friends, and I think I would talked on the phone, pretending she was there, and he was on the phone with me, and I spoke away from the phone as if I had someone there. So honestly, he knew that as well, and he was just didn't buy into it. And I remember that was one of the last few days leading up to the breakup. I remember when he did break up with me, I really felt like I lost a big part of myself, because in those 2 years, I was first 2 years of college. I was enjoying my time being in this relationship, college time. So I kind of lost this self-identity of Emily. And when that trigger was pulled, I realized there was not much left. There was Emily was just completely naked by herself, little to no friends. And this, for context too, at this time I was living with my partner and we had a dog together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When this breakup happened. Yeah, I was 20 years old and he was 22. During this time as well, I was transferring to another university. So this was around summer, July of 2017. And I was preparing to transfer to a new school the following month. And he just graduated from college at that time. And then I think it was a wake-up call for me, because not only did I feel like that relationship was still worth giving another shot, I also realized I took full accountability. I was this relationship ended primarily because of you, Emily. You were not able to show up in a healthy way. You were pulling all these different things over and over again that basically drained him. And he was really sad to pull the trigger. He didn't really want to, but I think there were so many indications that he should, because if not, Emily is just going to keep doing this, and it's just not a healthy relationship. So in those 8 months of not being together, I worked on myself a lot, partially to, I guess we could say, get him back, but also because I just knew that I needed to be a healthier person. And the first step was stoicism. I was listening to Tim Ferriss, and I remember, I think I heard Ryan Holiday on his podcast. One of the first books I listened to was The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and then I read The Daily Stoic, and it was such an eye-opening experience in that, number one, I don't have to react to every single thing I see, read, or hear, and number two, there are ways for me to be neutral versus this high up and down Emily that was the case for the first 2 years of that relationship. I also saw that as being one of the reasons why I didn't have very meaningful connections, because I feel like my behaviors also lingered out to friendships. in the way I treated people. Partially out of my competitiveness, like I just think it became a little like aggressive, like that lacked the compassion, it lacked this softness approach, which I think I really tried to work on over the past few years, is like that sweet balance between Emily when she's out in her business or work life. She can be a little bit more direct and sassy and whatever we like to call me, but I've always wanted to ensure that I could jump back into the sweet softness of who I really am at my core too, especially with a partner. So yeah, I mean that breakup was really, really tough because I had no one to talk to about it. I had no friends at that time, but I worked through it by myself. Kind of common theme is like that belief factor of I can do it, meaning like I can become better, I can become a better person, I can become a better Emily. And that was triggered by being broken up with. And, you know, when we got back together, I really indicated, you know, that I understand that some of these patterns were hurtful, that you have that fear that they will come about again, but you should take time to observe it over the next few months and you can kind of judge it yourself. So that's why we were able to get back together and continue. But that was the start of my introspection journey, was realizing that, you know, Elia, I could have stayed the same person. I could have gone and dated other people, gone on a whole journey of, I just had a breakup. Let me go have fun at my new school. Let me go hook up with new guys, all of these different things. And I didn't want to, because I really had that come to Jesus moment, like, oh shit, if you just take accountability for your life, like if you just go, like, that was my fault, like I was the one that was being a shitty person, instead of being like, oh, he does this and that causes me to do this. It's just like, take it as it is. You just become better, you know. And I related that in my sports experience as well, where in tennis I can't just be like, oh, my opponent is doing this, that's why I'm missing. It's like, no, like you can become more consistent. You're gonna have different opponents every time. You can't blame it on your opponent every time. So that's kind of how I looked at it in terms of my introspection and becoming a better person.
Props to you on the progress. I've said this already many times, but I'm just going to repeat myself in this case. I think it's incredible. What did you learn about the relationship with your mom throughout this process?
Two things. Number one is that I do think I observed some of that unhealthy behavior from her, not to throw her under the bus, but observing that and realizing like, okay, that's where it came from, and allowed me to go, okay, that's not really an example of the type of partner or woman you want to be. And that also made me go, okay, what are better examples? I started to write them down, like types of people that I looked up to, why I looked up to them, what traits I wanted to incorporate more as a person. But the second part of that is also with you, and this was definitely more so in the recent 2 to 3 years. But I realized, you know, even though she has not taken accountability for her own unhealthy behaviors, whether it's just as a partner or mom, I have a lot of compassion in that it's not really her fault, in the way that she's just unaware of it. And I take this with other people as well. You know, I don't really blame people for being the way they are, because I think there's just more to their story than I can imagine. And the best thing that I can do is take care of my half to make it as pleasant of an experience with that person as possible, especially with people that are on the opposite spectrum in that way. That was my big realization, was, you know, her ways, it's not really her fault. She didn't have an opportunity to really snap out of it, but I'm fortunate to have been able to. So take that kind of as like a blessing, as kind of a maybe life purpose in a way, and to practice being compassionate and understanding for people, like being the rock for other people. You know, there's that kind of ties into attachment styles, which I've mentioned to you briefly before, just in that when there's basically insecure attachment styles and secure attachment, and there's only one secure attachment. And there's like anxious, avoidant, fearful, avoidant is the insecure ones. But basically, in the studies, it shows that obviously two secure partners make a really great fit. But even if one partner is secure and one partner is anxious per se, that secure person plays as a really, really good bouncing board for like anxious, like if they come out into their own little, insecure behaviors, that secure person staying steady and not reacting to it. And, whether that's through a form of compassion and love or being mindful, whatever their own tricks are, that enables to de-escalate someone with anxious attachment, someone that might act out in those. And if they're acting out towards a secure person, it brings it down. To me, as I say that, it makes me think of similar to like the scale of consciousness, right? Like if you are in this loving vibration and someone's acting in apathy, it really just overwhelms and kind of shuts down the apathy or the fear, whatever lower vibration from escalating further. It just kills the fire from building, unlike if you were to add on to it with more fear, like the same, it would just be more fire.
Do you see yourself as a secure attachment style?
Relatively. I think just like anything, I think everyone is on a spectrum. What I've worked on in the recent probably 6 to 7 months is working on how I can be consistently secure regardless of the variables. That's similar to how I look at it in tennis, right? It's like being a consistent player, making all my first serves regardless of who my opponent is exactly how I see it. Meaning I don't have to be like, oh, it depends on who my partner is. It's like, no, I should be able to be secure Emily and more stable and recognizing like where I get tripped up and when I do, what I've worked on is utilizing more often like mindfulness to really ask myself, why is that? Like, for example, even for you, you've always said, just make sure that you're saying it from a place of love and peace. And for me, I've always worked on asking myself before I send a text or before I answer a phone call, am I in a place of love and peace right now before I hit send? Because that's when you really ask yourself, like, are you sure? You start to rationalize, like, wait, am I? And it can help catch you before you do things that just are harder to work back from. So I'd say 70% secure.